it's time for chapter 7. When I began recording this morning, it was a pretty quiet house, but this one might be a little more lively in the background, so just bear with. We have discovered in the last 2 chapters that events have changed rapidly, and instead of it being a happy bunch of animals living prosperously on a quiet little farm, now there were 2 factions of pigs that didn't get along. The windmill controversy, the trade with humans controversy. Again, this is an allegory. So all of those events have something to do with Soviet history. Some of it's on you to go figure out what that means, because I'm not going to tell you both stories at the same time. And how much you want to dig in is important. This isn't just a story about the Soviet Union. This is a story about humans and how humans act. Like, we might want to have this perfect society where we all work together, but factions form and people try to take over leadership and who's better and who can get the most friends and who has the toughest friends who will stand up for you and fight for you like the dogs do for Napoleon. And who's going to win out, whose ideas win. It just seems like a human thing. And then there's the part where the ones who are kind of in charge can bully the others into just doing what they say without having any input of their own. So now the leaders in the story are doing all the decision making, and the folks who are the followers are just having to take whatever happens as changes occur. And changes continue to occur. Okay? All right, let's go ahead with chapter 7. It was a bitter winter. The stormy weather was followed by sleet and snow, and then by a hard frost which did not break till well into February. The animals carried on as best they could with the rebuilding of the windmill, well knowing that the outside world was watching them, and that the envious human beings would rejoice and triumph if the mill were not finished on time. Out of spite, the human beings pretended not to believe that it was Snowball who had destroyed the windmill. They said that it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew that this was not the case. Still, it had been decided to build the walls 3 feet thick this time instead of 18 inches as before, which meant collecting much larger quantities of stone. For a long time, the quarry was full of snowdrifts, and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in the dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was cruel work, and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold, and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches on the joy of service and the dignity of labor, but the other animals found more inspiration in Boxer's strength and his never-failing cry of, "I will work harder." Okay, I apologize for the sounds that you're hearing in the background, but that's just going to be how it is today. So one of the things that happens in this last paragraph is kind of important. They pretended the humans that they deal with pretended not to believe that it was Snowball, but the animals believed it. Okay, flip that around. Remember whose perspective that you're getting this from. Did Snowball do it? The humans say no. The animals say yes. But the whole idea that it was because it was so badly built that it fell down in the windstorm, kind of the evidence that they build it thicker this time tells you that some of their leadership may also suspect that that was the reason that it fell down. So keep that in mind. Okay? In January, oh, and also, remember our question about who's more faithful to animalism? The ones that just continue to work and never lose heart and never believe in the bad side of things. Boxer and Clover get mentioned. They get a call out here, so it's kind of important. And what do they symbolize? In society, these hardworking individuals, these middle class or lower middle class workers that go to work every day, work their heart out, and don't question the system. That's who they are, okay? And they are loyal to the cause. All right, in January, food fell short. The corn ration was drastically reduced, and it was announced that an extra potato ration would be issued to make up for it. Then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted in the clamps, which had not been covered quickly enough. The potatoes had become soft and discolored, and only a few were edible. For days at a time, the animals had nothing to eat but chaff and mangles. Starvation seemed to stare them in the face. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Emboldened by the collapse of the windmill, the human beings were inventing fresh lies about Animal Farm. Once again, it was being put about that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, and that they were continually fighting amongst themselves, and resorted to cannibalism and infanticide. Napoleon was well aware of the bad results that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known, and he decided to make use of Mr. Whymper to spread a contrary impression. Hitherto, the animals had had little or no contact with Whymper on his weekly visits. Now, however, a few selected animals, mostly sheep, were instructed to remark casually in his hearing that rations had been increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered the almost empty bins in the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with sand, which was then covered up with what remained of the grain and meal. On some suitable pretext, Whymper was led through the store shed and allowed to catch a glimpse of the bins. He was deceived and continued to report to the outside world that there was no food shortage on Animal Farm. There is a food shortage, but the outside world is being shown a lie. The sheep are instructed to say things that aren't true, and the store shed is faked to look full. So this again has a parallel in Soviet Union history. The pretext of everything's fine here, everything's good, we're not suffering. But that's crooked, it's not true. Nevertheless, towards the end of January, it became obvious that it would be necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent all his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs. When he did emerge, it was in a ceremonial manner, with an escort of 6 dogs who closely surrounded him and growled if anyone came too near. Frequently, he did not even appear on Sunday mornings, but issued his orders through one of the other pigs, usually Squealer. One Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens who had just come in to lay again must surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted, through Whymper, a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of these would pay for enough grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and conditions were easier. When the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that the sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed that it would really happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for the spring sitting, and they protested that to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time since the expulsion of Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion. Led by 3 young black Minorca pullets, the hens made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which smashed to pieces on the floor. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens' rations to be stopped and decreed that any animal giving so much as a grain of corn to a hen should be punished by death. The dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. For 5 days the hens held out, then they capitulated and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens had died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in the orchard, and it was given out that they had died of coccidiosis. Some of you chicken folks might know what that is. Whymper heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered, a grocer's van driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. On this particular day, there are protests all over the country because of violence against African Americans and the death of a man in Minnesota at the hands of police. And this is, it's a parallel. Okay, so the chickens lay their eggs on the roof and they destroy them. They vandalize. They destroy the very thing they say they're trying to save. And they do it as in protest to show just how wrong they feel things are, to get attention. It doesn't work. They are starved. And then they say they had a disease and that's why they died. That's not why they died. And they have to give in. They have to give up their babies. Okay. And so to us as humans, we eat eggs, we eat chicken. You know, we're not really thinking about this as being a horrible sacrifice or anything like that. But when you go back to what was supposed to happen in Animal Farm, if you go back to Old Major's speech, this was exactly one of the things that they were hateful towards the humans for, what the humans were doing to them. It was used as an example. Now, it's insisted upon that the hens give up their eggs. And so they've done some traumatic things to try to change that judgment, and it did not work. All this while, no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pinchfield. Napoleon was by this time on slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It happened that there was in the yard a pile of timber which had been stacked there 10 years earlier, when a beech spinney was cleared. It was well seasoned, and Whymper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whenever he seemed on the point of coming to an agreement with Frederick, Snowball was declared to be in hiding at Foxwood, while when he inclined toward Pilkington, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. Still bringing Snowball up. Snowball's not in both places. He's just choosing to be like, I like him because he doesn't like Snowball. Suddenly, early in the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball was secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night it was said, very, very important to point that out, he came creeping in under cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief. He stole the corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beds, he gnawed the bark off the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it became usual to attribute it to Snowball. Scapegoat. Okay. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and done it. And when the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, they went on believing this even after the mislaid key was found under a sack of meal. The cows declared unanimously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome that winter, were also said to be in league with Snowball. Anything that went wrong. We do that in our own society too. If there is a faction or a group of people that you don't care for, then they're the reason that your faction or your group doesn't do well. It's a pretty common human thing to blame, put the blame on someone else, whether it's deserved or not. Okay. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities. With his dogs in attendance, he set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm buildings, the other animals following at a respectful distance. At every few steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footsteps, which he said he could detect by the smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the barn, in the cowshed, in the hen houses, in the vegetable garden, and found traces of Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his snout to the ground, give several deep sniffs, and exclaim in a terrible voice, "Snowball, he has been here. I can smell him distinctly." And at the word Snowball, all the dogs let out blood-curdling growls and showed their side teeth. Okay. Every year when I teach this, there are kids who just think, oh, he can really smell him. Why would he say that he could smell him if he can't? Of course he can. Snowball's the bad guy. If you believe everything that somebody says without any of your own evidence, you can be easily misled. All the animals just have blind allegiance to Napoleon. He says something's true and they're like, Napoleon's right. He's always right. The animals were thoroughly frightened. It seemed to them as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence pervading the air about them and menacing them with all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together and with an alarmed expression on his face told them that he had some serious news to report. "Comrades," cried Squealer, making little nervous skips, "a most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick of Pinchfield Farm, who is even now plotting to attack us and take our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins. But there is worse than that. We had thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambition, but we were wrong, comrades. Do you know what the real reason was? Snowball was in league with Jones from the very start. He was Jones's secret agent all the time. It has all been proved by documents which he left behind him, and which we have only just discovered. To my mind, this explains a great deal, comrades. Did we not see for ourselves how he attempted fortunately without success, to get us defeated and destroyed at the Battle of Cowshed. Again, go back and read that. Go back and read the Battle of the Cowshed, what Snowball did to destroy them. All along he was working for Jones? How was that supported? Okay. The animals were stupefied. This was wickedness far outdoing Snowball's destruction of the windmill, but it was some minutes before they could fully take it in. They all remembered, or thought they remembered, how they had seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed, how he had rallied and encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant, even when the pellets from Jones's gun had wounded his back. At first, it was a little difficult to see how this fitted in with his being on Jones's side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his forehoofs beneath him, shut his eyes, and with a hard effort managed to formulate his thoughts. I do not believe that, he said. Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed. I saw him myself. Did we not give him Animal Hero First Class immediately afterwards? That was our mistake, comrade, for we know now, it is all written down in the secret documents that we have found, that in reality he was trying to lure us to our doom. But he was wounded, said Boxer. We all saw him running with blood. That was part of the arrangement, cried Squealer. Jones' shot only grazed him. I could show you this in his own writing if you were able to read it. The plot was for Snowball at the critical moment to give the signal for flight and leave the field to the enemy. And he would nearly succeeded. I will even say, comrades, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leader, Comrade Napoleon. Do you not remember how, just at the moment when Jones and his men had got inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled, and many animals followed him? And do you not remember, too, that it was just at that moment, when panic was spreading and all seemed lost, that Comrade Napoleon sprang forward with a cry of death to humanity and sank his teeth in Jones's leg? Surely you remember that, comrades, exclaimed Squealer, frisking from side to side. Now, when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seemed to the animals that they did remember it. At any rate, they remembered that at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee. The Boxer was still a little uneasy. I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor at the beginning, he said finally. What he has done since is different, but I believe that at the Battle of the Cowshed he was a good comrade. Our leader, Comrade Napoleon, announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly, has stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was Jones's agent from the very beginning. Yes, and from long before the rebellion was ever thought of. Ah, that is different, said Boxer. If Comrade Napoleon says it must be right. You can go back and read the Battle of the Cowshed. You can see what Napoleon did. You can see what Snowball did. And you can tell yourself whether or not you believe this new version is the more correct. Okay? But Boxer is doubtful until he hears the direct words that Napoleon said it. No, okay. Napoleon said it must be right. Well, I'm dumb, so what do I know? Do you know anybody who follows leadership blindly without questioning their motives or the changes that they make and the things that they say? Probably. It happens all the time. It's very human. That is the true spirit, comrade, cried Squealer, but it was noticed he cast a very ugly look at Boxer with his little twinkling eyes. He turned to go, then paused and added impressively, I warn every animal on this farm to keep his eyes very wide open, for we have reason to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking among us at this moment. 4 days later, in the late afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. When they were all gathered together, Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse wearing both his medals, for he had recently awarded himself Animal Hero First Class and Animal Hero Second Class, with his 9 huge dogs frisking around him and uttering growls that sent shivers down all the animals' spines. They all cowered silently in their places, seeming to know in advance that some terrible thing was about to happen. So now Napoleon's given himself medals. Napoleon stood sternly surveying his audience. Then he uttered a high-pitched whimper. Immediately the dogs bounded forward, seized 4 of the pigs by the ear, and dragged them, squealing with pain and terror, to Napoleon's feet. The pigs' ears were bleeding, the dogs had tasted blood, and for a few moments they appeared to go quite mad. To the amazement of everybody, 3 of them flung themselves upon Boxer. Boxer saw them coming and put out his great hoof, caught a dog in midair, and pinned him to the ground. The dog shrieked for mercy, and the other 2 fled with their tails between their legs. Boxer looked at Napoleon to know whether he should crush the dog to death or let it go. Napoleon appeared to change countenance and sharply ordered Boxer to let the dog go, whereat Boxer lifted his hoof, and the dog slunk away, bruised and howling. Those dogs were about to attack Boxer. Boxer defended himself, and because he looked to Napoleon for what should I do next, Napoleon decided to let the dog go. You need to go back a little bit and think about, why did the dogs go after Boxer? Accident? Okay. Presently, the tumult died down. The 4 pigs waited, trembling with guilt written on every line of their countenances. Napoleon now called upon them to confess their crimes. They were the same 4 pigs as had protested when Napoleon abolished the Sunday meetings. Without any further prompting, they confessed that they had been secretly in touch with Snowball ever since his expulsion. They had collaborated with him in destroying the windmill. They had entered into an agreement with him to hand over Animal Farm to Mr. Frederick. They added that Snowball had privately admitted to them that he had been Jones's secret agent for years past. When they had finished their confession, the dogs promptly tore their throats out, and in a terrible voice, Napoleon demanded whether any other animal had anything to confess. Now, before we get any further, you might be thinking that this paragraph completely backs up everything that's been being said about Snowball being a traitor and planning all these things, because these other traitors confessed that they were in league with him. First of all, torture and holding somebody's life over them, saying we are going to kill you unless you confess, will make a person confess to anything. So yeah, they said, sure, yeah, we did that. Okay, don't kill us. And then they got killed. Gave them no time to say, well, wait, you said if we said. No. Just killed them. Torture gets false confessions all the time. Scientific fact, okay? Torture is not a good way to get real confessions. It's a really good one to get false confessions. All right. Okay, so now they've demanded if anybody else had something to confess. The 3 hens who had been the ringleaders in the attempted rebellion over the eggs now came forward and stated that Snowball had appeared to them in a dream and incited them to disobey Napoleon's orders. They too were slaughtered. Then a goose came forward and confessed to having secreted 6 ears of corn during last year's harvest and eaten them in the night. Then a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, urged to do this, so she said, by Snowball. And 2 other sheep confessed to having murdered an old ram, an especially devoted follower of Napoleon, by chasing him round and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a cough. They were all slain on the spot, and so the tale of confessions and executions went on until there was a pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which had been unknown there since the expulsion of Jones. They're slaughtering animals, and they're all confessing to being in cahoots with Snowball with all these various and unlikely crimes. This is a hard chapter for a lot of kids to get. Why would they confess to crimes? Why would they confess to being in cahoots with Snowball if it wasn't true? It's hard. And it's hard to make up what would have happened to lead to that. And it stretches your idea to believe things. When you see people say they did bad things, they think they're going to save their lives by saying it, but what they do is they end up just being killed anyway, and then they cement people against the wrong side. It just happens. Okay. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away in a body, meaning all at once. They were shaken and miserable. They did not know which was more shocking, the treachery of the animals who had leagued themselves with Snowball, or the cruel retribution they had just witnessed. In the old days, there had often been scenes of bloodshed equally terrible, but it seemed to all of them that it was far worse now, that it was happening among themselves. Since Jones had left the farm until today, no animal had killed another animal. Not even a rat had been killed. They had made their way on to the little knoll where the half-finished windmill stood, and with one accord they all lay down, as though huddling together for warmth. Clover, Muriel, Benjamin, the cows, the sheep, and a whole flock of geese and hens, everyone. Indeed, except the cat, who had suddenly disappeared just before Napoleon ordered the animals to assemble. For some time nobody spoke. Only Boxer remained on his feet. He fidgeted to and fro, swishing his long black tail against his sides, then occasionally uttering a little whinny of surprise. Finally, he said, "I do not understand it. I would not have believed that such things could happen on our farm. It must be due to some fault in ourselves. The solution, as I see it, is to work harder. From now onwards, I shall get up a full hour earlier in the mornings." And he moved off at his lumbering trot and made for the quarry. Having got there, he collected 2 successive loads of stone and dragged them down to the windmill before retiring for the night. The animals huddled about Clover, not speaking. The knoll where they were lying gave them a wide prospect across the countryside. Most of Animal Farm was within their view, the long pasture stretching down to the main road, the hayfield, the spinney, the drinking pool, the plowed fields where the young wheat was thick and green, and the red roofs of the farm buildings with the smoke curling from the chimneys. It was a clear spring evening. The grass and the bursting hedges were gilded by the level rays of the sun. Never had the farm, and with a kind of surprise they remembered that it was their own farm, every inch of it their own property, appeared to the animals so desirable a place. As Clover looked down the hillside, her eyes filled with tears. If she could have spoken her thoughts, it would have been to say that this was not what they had aimed at when they set themselves years ago to work for the overthrow of the human race. These scenes of terror and slaughter were not what they looked forward to on that night when old Major first stirred them to rebellion. If she herself had had any picture of the future, it had been of a society of animals set free from hunger and the whip, all equal, each working according to his capacity, the strong protecting the weak, as she had protected the lost brood of ducklings with her foreleg on the night of Major's speech. Instead, she did not know why, they had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind, when fierce growling dogs roamed everywhere, and when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces after confessing to shocking crimes. There was no thought of rebellion or disobedience in her mind. She knew that, even as things were, they were far better off than they had been in the days of Jones, and that before all else, it was needful to prevent the return of the human beings. Whatever happened, she would remain faithful, work hard, carry out the orders that were given to her, and accept the leadership of Napoleon. But still, it was not for this that she and all the other animals had hoped and toiled. It was not for this that they had built the windmill and faced the bullets of Jones's gun. Such were her thoughts, though she lacked the words to express them. I would mark that paragraph. That paragraph really explains the loyalty to animalism that Clover has and what their expectations were, and compares it to what the actual reality is. It's a really good paragraph for looking at what went down. Okay. At last, feeling this to be in some way a substitute for the word she was unable to find, she began to sing Beasts of England. The other animals sitting round her took it up, and they sang it 3 times over, very tunefully, but slowly and mournfully, in a way they had never sung it before. They had just finished singing it for the 3rd time when Squealer, attended by 2 dogs, approached them with the air of having something important to say. He announced that, by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, Beasts of England had been abolished. From now onwards, it was forbidden to sing it. The animals were taken aback. "Why?" cried Muriel. "It's no longer needed, comrade," said Squealer stiffly. "Beasts of England was the song of the rebellion, but the rebellion is now completed. The execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, has been defeated. In Beasts of England, we express our longing for a better society in days to come. But that society has now been established. Clearly, the song has no longer any purpose." Frightened though they were, some of the animals might possibly have protested, but at this moment the sheep set up their usual bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for several minutes and put an end to the discussion. So Beasts of England was heard no more. In its place, Minimus the poet had composed another song which began, Animal Farm, never through me shalt thou come to harm. And this was sung every Sunday morning after the hoisting of the flag. But somehow neither the words nor the tune ever seemed to the animals to come up to Beasts of England. Let's review our questions. All right. What does Boxer think about Napoleon? It really doesn't change. If Napoleon said it, it must be right. He has questions, but he figures he'll just work harder. That's all he really can understand to do. At what point in the novel does the mood drastically change? Well, we said at first it did change when Snowball was chased away. But doesn't it change like even more, like drop down even another layer and level beyond when the animals are slaughtered? And the other animals just like go and like huddle together in terror. I think that's the big change right there. What group of animals stages the rebellion in chapter 7? That was the hens. And they sacrificed their own eggs to say that they didn't want their babies to be sold. They didn't want to be mistreated in that way. They had been promised better than that. And what actually causes the windmill to collapse, I hope that you know that it wasn't Snowball. He is a scapegoat in this situation. And how do we know that Squealer's threat of Mr. Jones returning is untrue? Well, there's a little passage in one of the chapters recently where it talks about Jones had moved away out of the county. He doesn't even care anymore about getting Animal Farm back. So that's just a threat they still continue to use. Initially, trade with humans was not allowed, and how does Napoleon justify changing that rule? They had some goods they needed to buy because they were not doing well in feed, and also they needed some things for the windmill, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Which characters actually seem loyal to the ideas of animalism? I think the horses in particular. Clover in that last chapter gives a really good idea of what animalism had meant to her. And discuss the main conflict in chapter 5. So go back and double check on that one. That one was the whole windmill thing with Snowball and Snowball being chased off. Why does Molly leave the farm? She hooks up with a neighbor farmer who gives her sugar and ribbons, and she can return to the lifestyle that she liked better. She didn't want to be a worker. I mean, she wanted to work in a luxury situation. Okay. Explain how Napoleon uses the dogs. They are his police force's military. They kill animals that disagree with him or are associated with rebellious acts. And what happens in the Song Beasts of England? It is replaced by one by Minimus, and the animals are told never to sing it again because they don't need it anymore because now they have their perfect society. Which animal regularly uses propaganda? We talked about that. That's Squealer. So every time he comes up to talk to people, he's using propaganda. That's in your vocabulary list, but you need to be very aware of what propaganda is. It's basically advertising for ideas, trying to get people to think and feel a certain way because it benefits somebody. Okay. Why do the accused animals confess to the crimes? This is a tricky one. And basically, Orwell knows, and basically anybody who knows about torture knows that torture doesn't actually get good confessions. It gets untrue ones because the person, in this case animal, being threatened with their own death is going to say anything to not die, including exactly what you're trying to get them to say, which is why they got killed. So that is why. What is a scapegoat? Somebody you blame to get, to deflect and get others like to believe the way that you believe. And what does it mean to be patronizing? That's when you tell other people or other animals in this case that they don't need to make the decisions because they're really not cut out. We got this for you. We'll take care of it for you. You wouldn't be interested. We got this. Not a fun thing to do or have done to you. What does it mean to be fickle? That's when you change your mind depending on who you're listening to. Like 1 minute you're listening to Snowball and that sounds like a great idea. And the next minute you're listening to Napoleon, you're like, oh yeah, Snowball's bad. I don't know. You change your mind with whenever the wind changes directions. And what is blind allegiance? A really good example of that is how Napoleon is always right, is what Boxer says. Like he isn't like judging Napoleon. He's not questioning Napoleon. He even remembers. He knows he remembers that Snowball was heroic, but they tell him, no, he wasn't. And he's like, but I just can't believe that. Well, Napoleon says, oh, okay. All right, well, Napoleon's always right. Blind allegiance, even against evidence to the contrary. And how do you think the story will progress from here? Well, this is a depressing section, isn't it? They were so happy to have the farm to themselves, and Clover kind of sums it up. Looking out over the farm is so beautiful, and it's all theirs. And it is better, right? It's better than it was. It's not the humans. They used to slaughter us all the time. This is just one big bloody slaughter today. Humans do it all the time. So it's better. It's not feeling that great. And remember, it's an allegory. It's an allegory for the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. So be mindful of that. Look at those resources. Check it out online if you want to. But even bigger and more important, it's an allegory for human behaviors, not animal behaviors, about how we have this idea of how we can make a better place. And we try to set up a new system and we put the system in place. And then, you know how people these days always talk about that's not what the founding fathers would have wanted? That's what we're kind of talking about here. The animals, when they are like, this isn't how we planned it, this isn't what we wanted, you're changing it. And that's kind of what's happening here too. I mean, whenever you say like the founding fathers, whatever, I mean, founding fathers being the flawed guys that they were in the time that they came from, probably do have some issues with the way that we run things today. But what we're really talking about is when people in power change things for their own good without the good of the rest of the people at heart. And they try to justify it. It's like, well, you don't want worse than this, do you? I guess not. No, I don't. Okay. So be thoughtful about it. Human nature. What happens when somebody gets a lot of power? Okay. And we'll come back for the last chunk of the book very soon.